You want Asgard? It's yours.
Whatever game you're playing, it won't work. You can't defeat me.
No, I know. But he can.
Stellaris 4.0 has been officially announced by the developers at Paradox Interactive, and I'm very, very excited. Let's start off with a big question though. What is Stellaris 4.0? I want to say, don't worry, you haven't hit your head, gone into a coma, and woken up 20 years later missing Stellaris 2 and Stellaris 3. This is just the latest patch coming for Stellaris, a game that will, by this May, have been running for, I want to say 9 years now. Wow, that's a lot of development time. Normally each patch iterates up. Recently we had 3.14 or 3.14, and it next could be 3.15. Instead, the developers feel the changes coming are so monumental, they need a new clean slate with that number, the first number. So we're going from 3 up to 4. And we do have a massive amount of changes coming. This video is going to be enormous. I'll chapter it all. Make sure you've got a snack. You might even want to go for a walk in the middle of it and stretch your legs. We're going to be going through the changes to the pop system. Pops are dead. Long live pops. If you liked tiles in the past and you were upset when they went, well, oh boy, get ready for a whole new culture about missing pops to develop, ladies and gentlemen. We're also getting massive changes, thanks to that, to performance, and some changes to trade. That's changing. We're getting events changing. We are getting settings changing. Leaders are changing. Galaxy generations changing. Hearts of Iron style Empire focuses are coming. Don't worry, don't get scared yet. We'll go through it together. It's okay. An Empire timeline, changes to pop species and assimilation, and colonization changes, and ship designer changes, and even more. All right, without any further ado though, let's dive in. The next release for Stellaris will be the Q2 release, which is currently expected sometime around their anniversary in May. This will be the Stellaris 4.0 Phoenix update, and it will be released alongside the major expansion for this year. While designing the plan for the 4.0 release, the Custodian team had the following main priorities: performance improvements, that is their top priority in this list, new player guidance and game pacing, and finally, quality of life improvements. Much of this is apparently still in very active development, and Aladrin, the game director, doesn't have that many screenshots to show off just yet. So what we're going to go over here is the planned details, and then a more in-depth description of exactly what is going to come will be coming to all of us later on. As these features get closer to completion, some of them will likely change as the developers iterate on them, and it's possible some of them may end up very different from how they were described today. They could be delayed or cut altogether. These are some of the risks that the developers have when sharing plans with the community at this very early stage, but the game director believes that the benefits of sharing all of this information far outweighs the potential drawbacks. So, with that massive proviso out of the way, that being it could all change, it might not be this way, let's dive in and find out what is coming with the Phoenix update. We're going to start with that very first note, the very first heading: performance improvement. Late game lag, as you probably know if you've ever played Stellaris past the first 100 years, can be absolutely crippling in this game. Stellaris does have many moving parts. An incredible number of calculations are performed every month. For example, Lorenzo, one of the tech leads, recently talked about how the pops actually work. Did you know that every single pop must calculate its happiness and a whole host of other numbers every single day within the game? And that's at least according to the tech lead for Stellaris, which means when we have, 10,000 or 20,000 pops by the late game, that is many more calculations than 20,000 run every single day of game iteration, or even more as we get more pops. That's a terrifying number of calculations to have to perform just to keep the lights on. A lot of these calculations also rely on others, which forces them to be performed sequentially rather than in parallel. This means we can only use one processor, one thread for all of this stuff. We cannot parallelize it, which is partly why when you look at Stellaris running on your computer, you might notice it generally only uses 1.5 cores if not a little bit less. This causes the game to slow down as the number of calculations increases throughout the game, and it is especially noticeable in large galaxies. More planets and more empires means more pops filling more jobs, producing more resources, with more pathfinding for the fleets, more ships, more calculations, more drain. There's a solution that generally some xenophobic players have tried to employ, and that is genocide. It does have mixed results because yes, the game will go slightly faster if you wipe out half of all life, but taking the Thanos option isn't so great for your diplomatic reputation amongst other species. So if we take our minds back, if you've been with us for that long, to the 2.2 Stellaris Le Guin update, that is when there was a major overhaul to the pop and job system. We went from having tiles, may they rest in peace, to having a system closer to the current system with districts and planetary building slots. After that, there have been major performance implications in the late game with the number of pops we now get in galaxies. Because before we had the current system, when we just had the planets with the tiles, pretty much the maximum number of pops you could get on any one planet is 25, and given that there is an almost, except for habitats, set maximum number of planets in the game, that generally meant the number of pops you could have in a galaxy was 1,000, 2,000, maybe even 3,000 at worst, and couldn't really go above that. As of Le Guin, some galaxies might even start with 1,000 pops, so that's kind of terrifying. The developers have been working on incremental improvements ever since they brought in this, from a performance perspective, disastrous system in 2.2, but now they are changing things again. Last year, in December, Eladrin mentioned that the devs were exploring a Pops Groups prototype. They showed us a horrifying placeholder screenshot in the last dev diary of that year. We've got that screenshot, let's take a quick look. So here is the placeholder. This looks very different to what we're used to. In the politician role, we're seeing 200 population units, I guess. These aren't pops, these are something ever so slightly different, I believe. The initial experiments that the developers have done have apparently been very promising. So in the 4.0 Phoenix update, they are changing the way pops fundamentally work. Now, pops will be grouped together into pop groups based on species, strata, and ethics. And then these pop groups will produce workforce that is used to fill or partially fill jobs. As part of this change, they're also changing the overall scale of pops, which is why we see these 200 politicians written here. Most things that previously affected or manipulated one pop will now affect or manipulate 100. Of course, these changes will significantly impact other systems such as pop growth, migration, and others, and we are going to get a full dev diary on these details later on when it comes to the open beta. Now, we've talked about the elephant in the room here, the open beta. So the developers have told us we're getting the Phoenix update in May, but that's not quite true. They have mentioned last year that we are going to get an open beta before the next update, and that open beta, it sounds like, is going to include this new pop system. Exactly when the open beta is coming, we don't know. I'm assuming it's probably not in the next couple of weeks, given there's quite a few developer diaries they might want to do on different pieces of information, on different systems that will be coming with that open beta. But we are going to get our hands on the new pop system imminently. At least, we can say for certain, before the full release in May. And I'm definitely really excited about that. I mean, has anyone noticed how I'm very excited? I'm really excited. So, what does this pop system mean? How is it going to improve performance? Let me try to briefly explain. Okay, let's look at an example and try and work out why this is better for performance. I'm going to take an example of a planet with 50 pops on. This planet at the moment has to keep information on all 50 pops. It has to keep hold of their happiness, it has to keep hold of their job, it has to keep hold of what is in essence duplicate information. However, with the new system, in the worst case scenario, if a planet had 50 pops on and every pop was either of a different species, a different strata, or a different ethic, then you would still have 50 individual pieces of information to keep track of. But if only 2 pops shared the same fundamental pieces of information, if they were the same species, strata, and ethic, you would now, in the new system, have 1 pop's worth of information less to keep track of. because instead of having duplicate information across 2 or more pops, we would simply have another field in a single pop which tells us how many pops there are like that. This, of course, means if you have a very homogeneous workforce, let's say you've got a planet with pretty much only alloy workers and also politicians, and let's say you're a Gestalt consciousness, so you don't have strata and they're all the same species, that means you could have a planet with, in essence, 1,000 pops on, but in reality the game only has to keep track of 2 of them. The upper class pop, the politician, I know Gestalt consciousness don't have that, and then also the alloy worker job. Whereas the current system would need to keep track of 1,000 individual pops. This could dramatically reduce the number of calculations needed. One extra thing that would be great to be added here is if there was some information caching, a way of not having to calculate these things like happiness every day. However, I know we're working with over 8-year-old code here. Spaghettification is a thing. I'm just amazed the devs are going to actually be able to implement this Victoria 3-like system. I'm honestly so excited. The implications as well, I want to just expand a little bit further outside of our example, are quite broad, because now we can have special tabs in our outliner, in species tabs or somewhere else, where we can keep track of these major pop groups with different ethics, different things, different political groupings. And this really does open the door to having some quite nice UI elements and really good implementation of some internal politics or whatever you're thinking of in terms of, proper political factions and parties and that side of things outside of the current implementation, which is very focused on just one individual ethic. I'm not trying to shout that I want independence factions back, but I do want independence factions back. The next system that's going to have its insides pulled out and be reworked is the trade system. The current trade system includes a lot of constant calculations. These can be very, very bad for multiplayer. For example, a lot of out of sync issues do often tend to be around trade and trade routes kind of going awry in the middle of a multiplayer game. And on top of that, it's also going to be reducing lag because the game will no longer have to constantly calculate which is the best path for your trade route and whether or not there should be any piracy every single day. This had a disproportionately high impact on performance compared to the benefit of the system. The developers are simplifying this one significantly. Now trade will be a standard resource. This might be setting off alarm bells in your head. If it is a standard resource, that means the current trade builds that allow you to produce maximal amounts of trade whilst inhabiting entirely 0% habitability worlds may not work. If it's a standard resource, habitability may have an impact on our output, so that could mean a negative for your trade builds. However, there are some upsides. Trade will be used to represent general logistics capability, and as such will likely become available to Gestalt empires for these logistical purposes. They're going to cover it again in a future dev diary. Aladrin mentioned the other day as well that basically the current numbers they're looking at here is something like half of your trade value is going to go towards logistical capability, cough cough, naval capacity, cough cough. Yes, trade may now be helping, or should I say logistics will be helping you upkeep your fleets, meaning we might not need soldiers for that upkeep anymore. And then the rest of it will be going to something like local planet deficits and then converting whatever remains using your trade policies into either energy or let's say consumer goods or Unity or whatever it is you've got. This is going to make the system much simpler for newer players, which is a big plus in my book, because at the moment, as a newer player, trying to understand the pernickety nature of trade and exactly what the trade moots mean and all of these symbols and buttons and things is honestly very, very confusing. Almost all of the newer players I've spoken to find trade is pretty much the last thing that they understand out of kind of the early base game concepts that are pushed into your face straight away. It also hopefully means we can actually blockade planets, and this will have an impact on those individual planets and possibly the entire empire. This could give better depth for warfare. It might mean blockading certain key trade routes like Naboo, I don't know, could lead to some sort of galactic crisis where a new Supreme Chancellor gets installed. I'm not asking for much, I just want the Palpameme stuff, alright? It's not a big deal, let's move on. The final remaining system that Eladrin would like to highlight for having a major performance impact is, surprise surprise, fleets. Some of you may remember about a year ago I made a video basically shouting about how I thought Stellaris had too many ships. I might be wrong about the specifics of that, but I wasn't wrong about fleets having a large negative impact on our current late game performance. Whilst the 4.0 update will have some general fixes, they have got their hands full with all of the many changes coming in right now, so we should not expect them to get a big change to fleets anytime soon into the next update. It will probably be coming and getting more focus in a future update. So overall, the performance changes are pretty massive. Pops are dead, long live Pops. First we lost the planet tiles, now we're basically losing Pops, but I honestly think this one, the Pop death, is a massive step forward. No longer will we have to run around purging half the galaxy in an attempt to reduce late game lag. Instead, the developers have killed off half the Pops kind of for us. And if you're enjoying this video, please improve the performance of that like button. The first item is done, let's move on to item number 2, new player guidance and game pacing. A lot of the feedback the developers received from newer players indicated that Stellaris had become overwhelming in the early stages of the game. It provides a flood of decisions and a seemingly endless barrage of notifications. New players have trouble identifying which of these choices are important for long-term growth versus which are primarily flavor and don't actually have a massive gameplay impact on your situation. And these constant interruptions also make it difficult to form both short-term and long-term goals, as you are constantly distracted by new and important things that the game is trying to shove in your face. Change number 1, more meaningful events. The content design team have been reviewing events and notifications to ensure that any interruptions are actually meaningful. Events should generally not be purely informative. You should have a choice that then has an impact. A substantial number of purely informational events, such as the discovery of terraforming candidates or new strategic resources, have now been converted into toasts or notifications, so you can entirely ignore them if you want to. As an example, here we have an event, Contact Report Simple Forms of Life. During your first steps to the stars, you will notice evidence that life is surprisingly common out there in the galaxy. While this used to simply have an acknowledgement, you now have a choice based on the nature of your empire, which is going to give you something. For example, here we are probably playing as the UNE, I believe, and they can take a xenophilic choice, giving them xenodiplomacy research option and 10% progress. I want to know what the militarist option is here, because that could be wild. And definitely materialist. I'm very interested to see what the materialist and militarist options are for this, because getting a technology partially unlocked and researched already right at the start of the game, that's very powerful. That's going to have quite a big impact on some early gameplay decisions now. This is an additional boost to most ethics. For those of you wondering on xenodiplomacy, this one grants you the ability to build an embassy and plus 10% diplomatic weight, which is alright, but yeah, I definitely still want to see what the militarist technology option is, please. Anomalies are fantastic, and the developers think they're a wonderful content delivery vehicle during the exploration phase of Stellaris. But having a window pop up in your face every time one of your science ships finds anything even remotely interesting is decidedly less wonderful. For that reason, they are moving the pop-up to a toast, meaning it'll be in the top right corner. You can click on it or a notification to open the full anomaly window, or just go through the situation log. I would almost always recommend you don't complete anomalies until after you've set up your initial colonies, started out your initial position in the galaxy, and also importantly, increased your research income so that any bonuses you get from completing these anomalies, which are scaled by your research income, will be much higher, giving you a much better return on investment for completing those anomalies. Being able to ignore them for even longer and then deal with them later, I think, is a big win. Certain event chains that are not particularly loved have had, or will have, a bit of an adjustment as well. They're bringing in the Divine Glory class battleship. I'm fairly confident this new ship has currently been in the game files for years but not actually used. One thing I hope they're changing here, looking at the Divine Glory class battleship, is the spiritualist event chain that can start right at the beginning of the game, where you get those goddamn abominable radicals, and you have to send a boarding party, and then they start popping up in all your systems, and it's honestly just better to never board the first ship and pretend it never happened. I hope that gets reworked. Please tell me that's getting reworked. The developers are also expanding the message setting system to give you, the players, more control over how different messages should appear. You can choose if it should be a notification, a toast, a pop-up, and if the game should automatically pause. They're doing a pass on the default settings for each of these as well, but this is really awesome. This allows a lot of specialization. You can now get your game to be just right. Is there a certain type of thing you always want to be notified about in your face? Well, you probably want a pop-up. Is there something you don't want to have pushed in your face every time? Maybe make that a toast or a notification. Is something so important to you you wish the game would pause as soon as it happened? Definitely turn on that auto pause. This new message setting should allow you to customize your notifications to, as I said, suit your preference. And this preference-based system will be an amazing quality of life improvement to basically any player that wanted it to be ever so slightly different. And I have to hold my hand up here and say I am definitely one of those players. Leaders are getting reworked slightly. Again, leader trait frequency, I should say, is getting reworked. So, Empire leaders were cited in the feedback of many people as feeling very, very needy. They are constantly clamoring for attention to select a new trait if you own Galactic Paragons, which is both good and also terribly insufferable. The developers are looking at merging the first two tiers of leader traits and reducing the number of levels that you make trait selections at. This will have the overall effect of increasing the power of leaders a bit, as they'll start with what was formerly a tier 2 trait. So basically all of the tier 1 traits will now be doubled up to their tier 2 power level, it sounds like. And then when you select a new trait at level 3, instead of upgrading your starting trait, you'll have two formerly tier 2 traits. So at the moment, let's say you have Politician and that research trait that gives you plus 6% of the maximum level. At the moment you could have plus 6% research and plus 5% to agenda speed. Now you'll get both of them at level 2, meaning you'll definitely get plus 10% agenda speed as well as that plus 6% research speed. Very, very nice. This makes the experience a little bit smoother. Fewer trait selections does put you at greater mercy of the random selection of options. So the developers are increasing the number of option draws by 1. This should reduce some of the risk of getting a dead trait, something you hate, without diminishing the benefit of +1 leader trait option effects too much. I wonder how many levels will no longer get a trait pick. It sounds like level 2 definitely won't. I'm guessing level 4 is still specialization. Level 5 will probably be a pick, and then maybe we're missing out on level 6. Level 7 is a pick. Level 8 is going to be your manifest destiny pick, or your destiny trait, I should say. And then maybe level 9 is nothing, and level 10 is a final trait pick. So maybe we're losing around 3 different trait picks here, but they're probably going to double up or increase the level of all of our traits to pretty much the maximum, so we won't be upgrading traits anymore. That does reduce the number of annoying dead choices we'll have to make, because often you know you like a trait on a leader, it goes up a level, you see which extra traits there are, and you're like, no, I think I'll just get this trait up +1 level because it's the trait I want. It's plus 10% alloys, I'd like to take that to plus 20%. Or maybe it's plus 5% fire rate, I'd like to also get that plus 5% weapons damage if it's that wolf head trait, whose name I actually realize I never remember, but it looks like a wolf head, but I honestly have never recalled what it's called. Someone let me know in the comments. We have already seen this change hinted at a little bit, and that is Galaxy Generation updates. They've changed the menu in the start of the game, but now they're going to go even deeper. As Stellaris has grown, so has the number of pre-scripted systems. Many of these unique systems were set at extremely high weights to appear so that you'd get to see them. However, this causes most of them to appear in every game you play. Since these special systems usually contained 1 or more habitable planets, it then inflated the number of such worlds well above the expected number. especially since they did not respect the habitable world slider from your settings. This in essence means every galaxy would have a base number of habitable worlds you could not get below, no matter how low you put the habitable world slider. And this, in essence, as well meant that we had many more habitable planets than the developers kind of actually intended for us to have in our games. The developers have done a normalization pass on the weights of these systems. Many should still appear in each game, but it shouldn't try to stuff all of them in like a Christmas turkey fills with stuffing. That was a terrible analogy, but we're going to move on. They also now respect the habitable worlds and pre-FTL sliders from the galaxy setup if appropriate. Yes, that is amazing. And should generally no longer appear in the immediate vicinity of Empire homeworld. Kinda sad, but honestly that's probably quite good for a balance point of view. If an advanced empire or just a nasty neighbor picks up a system with 3 great habitable worlds very close to their capital, that's going to really affect you economically when they come and take all of your stuff. This change yields general benefits to game pacing and, indirectly, an improvements to performance in general, because fewer planets means fewer pops, which means smaller economies, which means fewer ships, which means better gameplay because the game will go faster, I suppose. Honestly, I think Eladrin possibly could have got away with shoving this one in the performance section, though I do see why he didn't. Empire focuses are coming to Stellaris. This I think is going to be a little bit controversial. Let's dive in, and then after we've gone through it, let's take a step back and discuss it calmly and rationally, and who the heck am I kidding? Let's just shout about how we feel. The focus trees in other Paradox Grand Strategy games do a great job of outlining possible ways you could take your country. In Hearts of Iron, for example, you already know the general plot. You know, Hitler is in power, Hitler declares war, Hitler hopefully loses. The different factions will behave as you expect until world tension reaches a certain level, after which the world descends into war, and then it's kind of anyone's business. The differences that will occur from game to game are largely due to how the events play out, and your interference in history lets everything spiral out into an alternate resolution. The focus trees not only provide a great way to create butterflies that can change history, but are fantastic at providing new players with short and medium term goals. I want to actually stop here for a moment, and I want to say that I don't think Hearts of Iron focus trees are a good thing to have in Stellaris. We're a grand strategy that's also a 4X. The devs are about to cover this, Eladrin is about to say it, but I do want to finish off that bit that I read. I know I said wait till the end, and say I don't want Hearts of Iron focus trees in Stellaris. I don't want that at all. I want something closer to a focus web, maybe. Something that looks a lot more like the research tree in Star Ruler 2. It starts at a central point and branches outwards. That I think could be alright, but still, you're kind of pigeonholing people into places with a focus tree. Right, anyway, let's get on and find out before I go too in depth on why I don't think it's a great thing, and find out how it isn't that thing which I think is bad. So, the developers have decided that static focus trees were not appropriate for Stellaris, thank God. Our sandbox and 4X nature, with a mysterious universe, requires any such systems to be more adaptable to what's happening in the galaxy. Instead of trees, the developers have decided to go with suggested tasks that fall into different categories: conquest, exploration, or development. These can range from investigating an anomaly to building a Dyson swarm, or at the highest ranks, becoming Galactic Custodian, or the Emperor, the good one. You'll be able to select your Empire's focused aspiration, which will skew the offered tasks towards your choice. So from this, we're kind of hearing we're going to get different tasks, possibly with different playthroughs. That could be kind of interesting. Let's find out about the rewards for completing these tasks though. Completing tasks gives no immediate reward, okay? But progresses you down the conquest, exploration, and development tracks. And if you get a task that you've already completed, that's fine, it will immediately complete and you can get a new one. The developers don't want us to sit there waiting to build our interstellar assembly until we get the interstellar assembly task up and running. reaching certain milestones. I assume we're going to get points towards conquest, exploration, or development, and then when we have enough of these points, we'll unlock a certain milestone. This will grant abilities. Okay, this is a big one, ladies and gentlemen, like forming federations, which, and this is going to be amazing for pretty much everybody, will be removed from the diplomatic tradition. Thank God. So federations are no longer going to be locked behind the diplomacy tradition. They will be available to all empires that complete certain diplomatic milestones. Amazing. They might also give us guaranteed research options for certain technologies. Certain technologies, I assume, that are going to bottleneck our play experience. This will reduce our reliance on random pools for technologies such as cruisers, colonial centralization, that can be a big one in the early game, or even mega engineering. So it sounds like if we play the game right, or if we complete the tasks well, we're going to get mega engineering unlocked, or even cruisers unlocked, at stupidly early times. Honestly, I think this sounds a bit abusable, but I do want to see exactly how it works before I form any opinions that are too strong. Veteran players already know how to play the game and are already adept at forming their own goals. The developers expect that you'll already be completing these tasks naturally as you play. They're primarily intended to teach new players how to play like veteran players, and guarantee that players will be able to force access to those important technologies if they're not getting them. I definitely like the idea of always being guaranteed technologies from a play standpoint, but from an immersion standpoint, I kind of like not getting certain technologies. It does make some playthroughs a bit unique, but in multiplayer situations it's definitely a ball ache when you're trying to get, for example, the motes technology or the alloy technology, and it just isn't coming up. They didn't mention those technologies, but I honestly hope they are in there as part of the reward system. Okay, so it's not going to be like Hearts of Iron. It's going to be also not like Europa Universalis 4's missions. It's going to be something a little different. We could end up with a weird system that doesn't actually have that much impact for veteran players, but for newer players, it's kind of a godsend. I think if that's what we end up getting, that's going to be really, really good. If it's a system which a veteran player doesn't even notice, but gives a massive improvement to the playability of the game for newer players and gives us better player retention numbers, I'm all for it, okay? However, if it pushes us into directions that are unnatural, if it feels wrong, I think it could be a problem. This is the first feature I've seen so far that I want to put a question mark next to and say, let's wait and see, this could be an issue. Stellaris is getting timelines. That's the next item on the agenda, Empire timelines. Europa Universalis 4 has had this feature. Granted, it's not called timelines, it has a slightly different name, but basically it has this effect. Accessible via a new tab within the situation log, the Empire timeline is a real-time chronicle of your Empire's journey, from humble beginnings on your homeworld to the heights of galactic dominance or the depths of ignominious defeat. The timeline will automatically document key events and milestones as they occur. I'm imagining this will be first planet colonized, first war fought, or just wars fought in general, taking vassals, losing vassals, becoming, members of the Galactic Council, passing laws, losing laws, becoming custodian, having the crisis spawn, killing the crisis, all of the important events you might want to read over during your gameplay. I have wanted this in the game for so long. They have it, as I said, in EU4. I've wanted it here. I think it's so thematic to be able to read back on the timeline of events, on what has happened, your story in the game. Stellaris is very much a story-driven, narrative-driven game. Yes, there's lots of meta stuff going on, and yes, you can optimize your gameplay, but most of us, when we're playing by ourselves, play Stellaris for the story of this game. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, let me know in the comments if you disagree here, but I often, when I'm playing the game for myself, it's all about the story. Occasionally I play games for funny numbers, but often, for me, it's about having fun, getting a rich narrative developing. Let's read a bit more. So, the devs aim for the timeline to serve as a practical ledger, allowing us, the players, to retrace the pivotal decisions and moments that shaped our game. It will also provide a rich narrative framework, transforming our gameplay into a story worth remembering. They look forward to sharing more details on Empire Timeline in a future dev diary. For now, your empires are cordially invited to prepare for posterity, and to ensure that your name echoes across the stars, even if it is Jeff. We're now onto the third and final category for the 4.0 Phoenix update, the quality of life improvements. Many of the other changes that have been made also fall into quality of life improvements, but there are two in particular that Aladra and the game director would like to highlight, and that is the species modification process and the colonization flow. Let's take a look at this. Colonizing worlds had quite a few quirks that the developers are smoothing out to make for a better overall experience, especially if you use the colony automation. They are changing the colony designation to a modifier that will now exist for some time after initial colonization. And this then lets you pick a colony designation and even turn on automation straight away when you give the colonization order. This should prevent a common situation in the mid to late game where you would colonize a planet but would have to pick and choose between using automation or losing out on the amenity and stability bonus of the default designation. That designation, of course, being the colony designation. This new flow also helps out automation significantly, since you won't end up in a situation where the colony is no longer a valid designation and it falls back to an auto-designated selection. Honestly, that doesn't happen that often to me, but what I'm hearing here that's really cool is that we can now find a world that we want to colonize in the mid to late game, look at exactly what features it has, what available districts it has, then decide how we want to use it. Is it going to be a mining world? Is it going to be a research world? Something like that. And then we currently have to wait for it to colonize, then come back and remember all those decisions we've made. Or usually what I do is I forget them and I have to redecide. It's agony. Now we can pick all of those decisions right at the beginning, implement them straight away, turn on automation, choose which features of the automation we want to have turned on, because let's not forget we can pick and choose which parts of the world we want automated, and just leave it to its own devices. This should make mid and late game planetary management even easier than it is today. The developers have gone through the genetic modification process as well, the other thing Aladrin wanted to bring up, and they are removing many pain points and making the overall flow much smoother. It's interesting that they're doing this in the run-up to what we are assuming at some point this year is a rework to the biological ascension. They mentioned in a previous dev diary that the biological and psionic ascensions are going to be retooled. I imagine improving this species system is going to be important for biological ascension not being so finicky, unless it changes fundamentally from what we've got now, which I suppose it could do, but I don't know, let's assume it won't. So now you'll be able to set a template as the species default, and you can then set subspecies variants to automatically integrate over time into the species default template. What does that mean? Well, we've got a lovely window here. You've been looking at it the whole time. Let's take a little read. On the left, you can see we now have subspecies, and it does look slightly different, but mostly the same. We can now see on each species how many genetic modification points there are available. I'm pretty sure what that column 3 from the right is. We can see the living standards, that's normal, but that genetic modification column is great, and the column next to it, not entirely sure what that is. Maybe that's a new feature we're getting, we'll have to find out, but we're getting more information on the species viewpoint. On top of that, the subspecies can be set as a default species, and then any non-default subspecies will get a species right. You can choose that they integrate into the default species. This will integrate 3 pops per colony per year. That's quite a lot, actually. And this means we no longer, I believe, have to use special projects to make all of the pops in our empire conform to certain types of pops. This is going to make conquest easier and more efficient, and god damn it, if efficient conquest isn't what gets me out of bed in the morning, I don't know what does. But it's also going to make pop management just in general in the mid and late game so much easier and more economical, because as I said here, we're probably not going to have to do a special project. Maybe they've gotten rid of the special projects entirely, and now you simply design a new subspecies and then you migrate or integrate pops into that species as you want. You can also, I assume, turn this off again so you can integrate some and then go, oh no, this is enough, I want the rest of these pops to remain as their original subspecies. A lot of possibility here, and a lot of it doesn't look so micromanagement hell. I am very keen as well to know here if this branch that this screenshot came from is from the pop rework or not. Because if we now have 100 pop units in place of what used to be 1 pop, 3 of those per year is sweet nothing. After 33 years we'll have done 1 pop integrated. I'll have to assume it's not. That's probably going to get updated to 300 pop units. The species tab, as you can see, is generally more helpful. And oh, sorry, I said that. The branch doesn't include the pop changes. It is actually noted. There are no pop changes here. Okay, good, fine. That was a little bit of needless extra information. Just pretend I didn't say it. Let's move on. The last little note here is on the ship designer. As they did with species modification, they've made some improvements to the ship designer or the general process of creating new ship designs. Basically, I think this is mainly a UI thing. Yeah, they're going to now allow us to choose a ship role, and then I think that suggests what exactly the ship is going to do. This feature has already kind of been in the game before, but it was a little bit less obvious, a little more opaque. Now it's very much in your face when you create a ship design. I suspect they'll also let us get access to this ship role thing as part of auto-generation, though maybe not. They do note here though, and this is a big plus for me, that the auto-generate designs checkbox, if it is checked on, won't stop you from saving a new ship design anymore. Thank God, because the first thing I have to do every game is turn off that darnable box for auto-generate designs so I can actually make a ship of my own. Now I won't have to uncheck it, I might still do that anyway, but I might not. There's no harm in seeing what the computer can draw up. Maybe it's still alright. Who am I kidding? Usually it's trash, isn't it? Alright, let's move on. There's going to be a lot coming in the next few weeks, and I'm hopeful that at the end of all of these dev diaries that are coming out on this new 4.0 patch, we'll get our hands on the open beta. Eladrin is hoping for something different. Eladrin is hoping to challenge the Lem patch for the patch note crown, i.e. longest patch notes ever. For those of you that might not remember, the 3.1 Lem update was a massive change. It was the first of the entirely free patches that didn't have an associated DLC. It was the beginning of the Custodian Initiative, and we kind of had a brand new version of Stellaris in the similar ways to now at that point. A couple of things that haven't been covered today are things like the new precursor selection and the Stellaris databank. From what Eladrin has said, the databank is basically kind of a Civipedia style thing, object, with lots of information. Not as in-depth as the wiki, which is fantastic and maintained online, but something we can access in-game. He didn't use the word Civipedia, I'm using that word, but to my understanding from what he said in the video, that's what it sounded like. Also, precursor selection is coming, so we can choose before the game starts which precursors we want to have, and I assume don't want to have in our game, so we're no longer going to be stuck having really bad precursors if we don't want to. That's a massive change. I'm looking forward to something that was hinted at, I believe, at the end of Christmas time. You'll have to select a minimum of 4 precursors, but you could select all of them. This in essence allows you to pick and choose which precursors you want to have appearing in your games. That's a massive quality of life improvement right there that I wish they'd just give us today. Please and thank you. Okay, this has been a phenomenally long video. We're going to be getting a phenomenally large patch as well though, so I think it all kind of balances out. If you've stuck with me all the way through and you're still listening to this bit, thank you very much. Let me know down in the comments below, and also let me know what you think of these big changes coming. I would love to hear from you. For the first few hours after this video goes live, I'll try and respond to as many comments as I can. And I also want to apologize for the delay on getting this video to you. I have been traveling between Thursday and today and been completely unable to record because I've been stuck in a hotel room. So that's unfortunate. I had a thing, family. I'm not going to get into it right now. But anyway, the video's over. If you'd like to watch something else on the channel, probably click the video on screen, which has probably been selected specifically for you. Right, wait for it, now.